excitement. They firstly win this world level tournament.
It's no mean feat. This is a real achievement. But let's see where we go from here. We have rights to be more excited about the future of Chinese football.
We saw some very modern elements of footballing tactics being implemented, but also being actually carried out by these players.
For those coaches, they have to renew their knowledge of how to coach young players.
Where there is a little bit of lacking is the access to high-level competition, which in Europe is incredibly easy because those structures already exist.
The younger players coming forward are so much better. I think that will feed on a very positive effect to the Chinese club system. And perhaps that wasn't there before. Got to be patient, but it can change fairly quickly.
They are champions, they are trailblazers, and they're only 12 years old. Welcome to the Chat Lounge. I'm Ziyun. A group of young Chinese footballers has stunned Europe, becoming the first Asian team ever to win Italy's prestigious Sigismondi Cup, often dubbed the mini World Cup of youth football. Joining me on this topic, Dr. Liu Tianbiao, professor at the College of Physical Education and Sports, Beijing Normal University; Mike Bastin, a China observer and senior lecturer at the University of Southampton, England; and Brandon Yates, CGTN senior content editor and sports host. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So let's start with the achievement itself. The Chinese football boy under-12 side won the Sigismondi Cup with a perfect record. 7 wins from 7 matches, capped by a penalty shootout victory over English top-flight team Everton's academy team in the final. Mike, you're from England. What was your first reaction when you heard the news?
I was very, very excited. I've hopefully been waiting for this for quite some time. Chinese sport in other areas also obviously been very, very strong. You're world class. Obviously, we point to table tennis, but obviously far more than that. And as you said, it's a very prestigious, almost mini World Cup. And I think it was the manner in which the China side won it so convincingly, undefeated, I think averaging 3 goals a game. I see 7 games, scored 21 goals, only conceded 2. I think for me, that's most significant. That is a very mature team. And also it's the strength of the competition. You said Everton is no mean team. Everton are a top flight English side, new stadium, Hill Dickinson, 53,000 capacity, 48 teams in the tournament, and also representatives from other top European clubs, Feyenoord, Lazio, Olympique Lyonnais, just to name a few, Roma. So it's no mean feat. This is a real achievement. Let's see where we go from here. But I think we have rights to be more excited about the future of Chinese football than ever before.
Indeed. Tianbiao, were you surprised? How significant is this tournament in the world of youth football?
Well, my first reaction was excitement because it is a Chinese U12 team, and they firstly win this world level tournament. I understand why this attracted so much attention in our country because the Chinese football has struggled at a senior level for many years. So this time, like a group of young Chinese players demonstrated that they can compete successfully against international opposition in international tournament. So people naturally become interested. This is a champion, right?
Brandon, as a professional sports show host, I'm not sure if you're following this, but what's your thought there?
Look, I think it's a very exciting achievement. And as Mike already mentioned, some of the opposition that they came up against are truly world-class, highly established football clubs and, from football nations that also have pedigree of great success. And another thing we also have to remember is that, China has a multitude of sports that are currently receiving large amounts of development and emphasis from a very young developmental age, where some of the clubs and nations that this team from China came up against are from nations where the predominant focus of youth development is in football. So to me, that points out that it's not necessarily a case of great development at this point in time from these Chinese youth. It's obviously just a great collection of talent. And that also can be indicated from what we've already mentioned, the 21 goals scored. And again, as Mike mentioned, only 2 conceded also really demonstrates great maturity, which is quite a remarkable achievement from such a young group of athletes. So while I am excited by the result, and it is a first, and it definitely would cause a splash, because we also, from my time in China also know that there is a great deal of desire from, just your standard citizens and football fans for football to develop in China because, historically China hasn't been a very strong footballing nation, but I can tell you from my time living there that there is a huge passion for the sport
Right.
amongst just general citizens and sporting fans in general. So I think, as exciting as this result is, my mindset is kind of more focused on what's next. I think that's going to be the big question is, what is going to happen with these youths? Are they going to be, developed and, put on a pathway towards professional football? Are they going to be potentially snapped up by some of these European clubs and be sent to academies, potentially in England or Spain or Italy or something like that? So I think that's something that needs to be looked at next is firstly, identifying certain talents. And if it goes beyond talent, what structure was put into place to allow these athletes to succeed? Was it great coaching? Was it great tactics? I think what happens next is going to be far more important for the development of Chinese football going forward, which I think is far more important than any individual tournament result.
Yeah, we'll dive
Just
deeper.
I think,
Sorry.
I think is it Li Haoyan secured a place in Barcelona's famed academy system?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right after that.
That's an important point to note. So that could be very serious. It's one player, but that is very significant. But Brandon's right.
It's the most prestigious youth academy on the planet by far.
Yeah, it's a small step. It's a big small step, but yes, there's lots to build on. Yeah,
We'll explore further on that, what they did right in the matches later on. But many people have called this one of the most inspiring moments in Chinese football in recent years. Is that fair, or are expectations getting carried away a little bit given that these players are only, 12 years old? Brandon?
Yeah, look, I think, considering the age group, it might be a bit of an overreach to say that this is, something that could potentially be highly significant for Chinese football overall. But if we look at the actual, tournament itself and what was accomplished by these players at this level and kind of focus on that particular element and not looking at the broader, picture, I think the actual achievement itself cannot be understated. It really is a fantastic result. And, it might not necessarily mean that China has found its next generation of World Cup stars. But I would also say that dismissing it entirely is equally misguided. So, youth football results are definitely not reliable predictors of future national team success, but they can reveal whether a development model is producing technically competent players capable of competing internationally. And I think that is something that is, like I mentioned earlier, aside from celebrating the result and what was achieved, what happens next and what can be built upon as a result of this fantastic success is going to be the most important element going forward. So this tournament in particular, within the under 12 age category, is definitely regarded as one of Europe's most prestigious international youth competitions. And, as we've already mentioned, some of the academy teams that took place, it really does attract some of the best academies in the world. And this year's event featured 48 teams, if I'm not mistaken. So it really is, in terms of these players and this team and this age group, it really is a significant result. But I think what is going to be more significant for Chinese football in the broader scheme of things going forward is what happens next. And we've already mentioned, Mike mentioned that a player has been signed up by La Masia, the Barcelona Academy. If that's as far as it goes, that's an incredible achievement because as far as I'm concerned, that's the most highly regarded and respected youth academy for football on the planet and, has produced some of the greatest players that the world has ever seen. So, there's definitely some talent that has already been identified, but I think it needs to go beyond that. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, tactics need to be analyzed. Is there a style of football that was used by these players that could be modeled in other teams? I think that's also something that makes certain nations in football successful. A style of football can literally be embedded in players from as young as 12 that then go on to the national team to feature at World Cups. And we've seen that with the Spanish national football team in particular, where a style of football is literally ingrained into the minds of future players from as young as 10 up until the age of 35. And maybe that's something that could also happen with these particular players and this system that may have been implemented at this tournament. So again, I wouldn't say it's overhyped at the moment. I think they definitely do deserve the positive media coverage and all of the celebrations that they're getting. I think that's highly warranted. But again, what is going to be more important is what comes as a result of this tournament going forward. And I think that's far more important for Chinese football. But to focus on this particular tournament and this particular victory, these players and this team deserve all the credit that they're getting right now, for sure.
True. But Chinese football has enjoyed youth level success before, but not necessarily as successful as this one. But what makes this victory different from previous bright spots? Maybe this question goes to Tianbiao. And what impressed you most this time?
So this time, the most impressive moment for me is they won a consecutive 7 matches against those European club academy players. You must know that playing in the tournament in a short time, I will take a lot of energy. You will feel tired, you will feel exhausted after so many matches in short times. So this group of boys, not only boys, a girl in center back, a group of kids, they won the match. I think this is a challenge for themselves. This is the most important thing. They conquered, they challenged themselves, they pursued their potential. So this is the most important thing. They showed their ability, their playing ability in a big tournament. This is interesting thing for me. Another thing interesting for me is it's different from previous tournaments that I know that many Chinese teams, they achieved some good results in the international youth games. They were official teams, but this time the Chinese football boys are under 12 and organized by unofficial party. So this is interesting for me.
That's a very significant feature of this victory. So,
yes.
For listeners who may not be familiar with the project, this privately organized project, Chinese Football Boy, Tianbiao, could you please briefly introduce, this team and explain how it operates to us?
As far as I know, the Chinese Football Boy is a grassroots youth football project initiated by football commentator Dong Lu. Maybe some of you know this football commentator before. I like a traditional academy where players are permanently enrolled in one institution. This project identifies talented young players from different regions and training environments across China and brings them together for camps, for competitions, and international tournaments. So according to public reports, it has been operating since 2017 and emphasizes extensive match experience and international exposure.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
It is privately organized, right? It's not a publicly funded project. So this is why it triggered such a huge row or attention, I should say, inside China. Yeah, Donglu is quite famous here in China, but not necessarily internationally. So I'm not sure if you've watched those matches against academy players from clubs such as Everton or Fiorentina and Braga. What qualities did these youngsters display that we've not traditionally associated with Chinese teams? Mike or Tianbiao or Brandon, any of you can explain that.
Perhaps say a couple of things.
All right.
I think it was the skill and the flair. I've seen footage. The way they did it, it was very, I'm using sort of cliches here, it was very reminiscent of, we talk about Brazilian flair, we talk about the Dutch and their total football going back a few years where they all play. Even the defenders have a lot of confidence, a lot of time. They celebrated very extravagantly with back flicks, and it was so refreshing to see such real self-belief and confidence and real ability. And let's not forget, these are 12-year-olds. These are very, very young. They're in Italy. The other teams have traveled from other parts of Italy, other parts of Europe. It's not, this is a real home from, this is a real change in their lifestyle. So I think that needs to be stressed as well. So I think it's the real passion and flair for the game. And I think I'd like to bring in now, I might mention it again, that the trend that we're seeing with younger Chinese people in other areas, in my area in particular in fashion, and that's Guochao. I think there's a real self-confidence and a real cultural confidence coming through that perhaps wasn't there when we saw successes. I remember in 2004, 2005, the under-20 China team that came runners-up in Malaysia, 2004, 2005, the Netherlands, won every single of their their group games, lost narrowly to Germany in 2005. A lot of excitement, slightly different generation, slightly different mentality, nowhere to go at that stage. Time's on their side at 12. So that path can be found over a number of years. But I think that Guochao is really stretching out of football. They're finding themselves.
And just to touch on what Mike said there, I think that this mentality element might be one of the biggest takeaways of this particular tournament, because historically Chinese teams have often been criticized for becoming passive against famous opponents. We've seen that in the past, where sometimes against seemingly more well-renowned opposition, they kind of become a little bit insular and lack confidence against some of the bigger teams. And it seemed like, from the brief, footage that I've seen, this group appears to believe it belonged on the field. So that confidence and that belief in your own abilities, especially in football, and particularly from, beginning from such a young age, is a very important mentality to identify and hold on to, and to continue to instill in these young players as they continue to progress. Because having the ability and the coaching is one thing, but the belief is something that is, I believe, equally important, particularly to develop that self-belief from a young age, which historically I think some Chinese football teams in particular have lacked. And again, some of the qualities that were briefly seen, I think, in this particular tournament and from this team, they're not traditionally associated with Chinese teams. So we saw some very modern elements of footballing tactics being implemented, but also being actually carried out by these players. It's one thing coaching, 11, 12-year-old boys and girls, but to actually see them, take that out onto the field is another kettle of fish entirely. So we definitely saw them implement certain tactics such as aggressive pressing, having confidence in possession, like Mike mentioned, like some of the famous Dutch teams of the past, some quick attacking transitions and comfort, again, this mentality element against elite foreign opposition. Those are characteristics that we often see from leading European academies, rather than, a group of kids that were brought together by a Chinese developmental project that just identified talent from all across the country. So I think a lot of these characteristics and mentalities and playing styles also need to be praised and pressed upon going forward, because we can't expect them to only have these mentalities and these playing styles in one tournament. It's something that needs to be noted and carried forward. And that's going to be probably the most important element in terms of using this tournament to further develop Chinese football as a whole.
That's true. But yeah, those qualities you mentioned are very important. But there is one question needs to be answered. Why this team? Or how is this Chinese football boy project or team different from conventional football academies and sports schools in China? There are a lot of academies and sports schools for youngsters in China. I think now it's over 1,000. But how is its model unique? Why it is them who, clinch the victory? Tianbiao, can you help us find the answer?
Yeah, thank you. I think the most distinctive feature is openness. Many traditional systems rely largely on centralized training and long-term institutional control over players. But this project is more flexible. Players come from different backgrounds, and the emphasis is identifying talent and exposing it to high-quality competition. But some critics say that the project simply gathers talented players across this country. To some extent, this observation is true, but identifying talent, selecting talent, and creating the right development environment are also important parts of the talent development process. So the best football system in the world do not only create talent, they also discover, they organize, and maximize talent. They help talent to play at higher level and higher level until the world.
I think I would emphasize the openness, Tianbiao. I think the openness is a big feature. If I could just bring in the UK system, we have an academy system here where many would argue that the kids are taken at a ridiculously young age, sometimes as young as 6. They sign up for the top clubs. They become very excited. The parents are often rewarded financially. But in so doing, they often have to sign away their right to play grassroots football, play their mates at the weekend. And I really cannot support that. And it's very intense. Very few actually make it. So I think the openness and bringing them in not that frequently and letting them go back to their regions, their hometowns, and I think that's a key feature. And China can learn from other countries like the UK that perhaps have not quite got it right. So I think China's in a good position here to build on this. So that I would say that I think is very, very key. And I think the next step, hopefully, is that this leads to enthusiasm amongst Chinese youngsters as well, that they can build on this and try to copy this team, and we'll see more passion in urban environments and rural environments across China for football. When I was there in the early 2000s for many years, basketball seemed to be most popular, but I think football has the potential really to eclipse that most comfortably, and hopefully that will start to happen now.
Well, when it comes to openness, you mentioned openness. I think every football academy here in China is open to young kids, but one issue is that, I came across this video blogger, is that he showed a Spanish coach footage of a traditional youth football training session in China. The coach said the methods looked like something from 30 or 40 years ago, when his father tried to teach him how to play football. And in his view, football is ultimately about competing under pressure and making quick decisions. And those qualities are best developed through match play rather than repetitive drills. Unfortunately, such kind of, repetitive drills is what the majority of those football schools or academies are practicing. So maybe that's why, or that's where the gap between Chinese football academies and those elite football academies like La Masia exists, right? This question goes to Tianbiao. Do you agree with such assessment?
In my opinion, I think a young player from being discovered until he became a World Cup level player, they need a lot of factors. One of the many factors is the environment. So nowadays in China, I think most coaches do not or cannot offer an ideal environment for those talent development. For example, in training, the training intensity could not reach a certain level, and also there are quite few pressure in the training and in the domestic matches. So it is a good way for this project, the China football boys. They have chance to play against those strong teams who play always under pressure and quick matches. So this requires or this force those kids players to react quickly, to play quickly, and to pass quickly, to make quick decisions. So this is important thing, I think. That's the first thing. The second thing, you mentioned the concept. Coaches train like 30 or 40 years ago. I don't want to say this is true, but for some training sessions, this exists. So for those coaches, they need to continue their study of coaching courses. I mean, they have to renew their knowledge of how to coach young players. We can also see that many Chinese coaches, they want to go to Europe to learn how European coaches, how they coach, how they study in the coaching course. I think this is a good start for them. I can also see the Ministry of Education in China, they have sent a lot of football teachers to England, to France, to Europe to learn. This happened some years ago, and when they can come back, they can bring those knowledge back to China and update their knowledge, not like 30, 40 years ago, but maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But at least this is
I think there's an important phrase here I'd like to just chip in with, and that's overcoached. I think the beauty of this game, often the coach is really a facilitator. Some players, you just let them go. They've got talent, you just encourage them to practice. A little bit of organization, of course, a little bit of tactical awareness, but just let them go. I mean, who coached Pele? Who coached Johan Cruyff, Maradona?
So I think we're seeing coming from the Premier League, right? We're seeing so many of these players that are overcoached and over sort of, there's so much focus on tactics and, system management and all of that sort of thing that, a lot of people are arguing that modern football is becoming boring because it's more about systems and tactics rather about allowing individuals to showcase what they can do and advocating for flair. So I think Mike has nailed it there that it is a balancing act. You need to identify talent and develop coaches like Tianbiao said, But I think especially from a youth level, there also needs to be a little bit of room for some of these athletes to actually show what they can do and have a bit of a, some room to actually stick their chests out and actually, show what they can do as individuals. But it is a balancing act, because modern football does also definitely require a lot of coaching and, system management and that sort of thing. But we also have to let these kids, just go out and play and showcase their abilities as well. It really is a difficult balancing act. I think it's actually more difficult to develop from these youth age groups than it is to, coach like almost a modern adult football team, because it really is difficult to balance equally, giving someone the opportunity to showcase what they can do, but also getting them used to certain systems and styles of play.
I think it's about practice as well. Just young kids having an opportunity to practice. You don't need a full sort of football pitch, well maintained. Obviously, even in urban environments where China has a lot of urban environments. I lived in Beijing. I know what it's like. There are spaces that can find that space and put the ball around, and that's what always. When you look at great footballers and where they came from, they just kicked the ball. David Beckham used to jump over the back fence and kick a ball into a very short space until it was dark. He just wouldn't come in for his dinner.
To be fair, historically, very few world-class players have come through an academy rank, like Mike mentioned, from like at the 9 level to seniors. A lot of them came from, like Mike mentioned, playing in the back street. I mean, some of the best African players that have ever emerged, like Didier Drogba, Michael Essien, JJ Okocha, some of these players, they literally, the first time they would ever see a professional football pitch is probably at the age of 17 or 18 when they were eventually flown over to Europe. So a lot of them are cultivated in very rural circumstances.
What you're saying that
coaching is necessary.
China doesn't need so many
no,
academies.
don't get me wrong. Like talent identification and having academies and having certain organizations and pathways forward for players to potentially become professionals is very important. But it's a balancing act. I think that identifying talent and getting them into those systems is definitely important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. I think talent identification is probably the first port of call. And then again, if they are put into these systems where they are being fast-tracked to become professionals, which doesn't often happen in football, because as we've seen in the past, a lot of great players don't actually get into those systems. They only get identified very late.
Yeah, actually, maybe you don't.
Through weeks of adversity before becoming professionals.
Yeah.
So having those academies are great, but then once those kids are in those academies, the coaching and
identifying those talents
is important, but you also need to give them the free rein to showcase what they can do.
Right. Identifying those talents is not a big problem here in China. The real problem is how can they, further develop into professional or successful football players like Messi or other, superstars, Ronaldo. But that's coming up next. Stay with us.
The strong wind was howling and whistling.
He was the first Chinese citizen to graduate from Yale University in the mid-19th century.
I was born on the 17th of November. She had prominent features. 3 of us were old enough to lend a helping hand.
He navigated between 2 vastly different cultures and moved further to realize his dream and promote understanding between the people of China and the United States.
Ye Mingxing was a native of Hanyang. I realized no danger. China is really awakening.
Come and join us in discovering the incredible journey of Yong Wang in his autobiography, My Life in China and America. Check out the Audible stories on radio.cgtn.com and all major podcast platforms. Just search for the podcast Books and Beyond and find My Life in China and America.
Welcome back to the Chat Lounge. We continue our chat on a youth triumph that offers hope for Chinese football. The issue, actually China has put in or invested huge amount of money and talent, I should say resources into this. But what makes people or the general public or those football fans so frustrated is that we still cannot, get into the World Cup or even the expanded World Cup final stage, right?
Right. I was just a quick point. I think, and I don't know what the answer is. Domestic football needs to improve, and it's a very credible level now. And I used to watch Beijing Guoan and very, very good standard. But I think that the Chinese Super League somehow needs to improve. So these players have somewhere to go domestically. I would have thought you can't have a major footballing nation succeeding without strong domestic clubs, as we see across Europe. So that's probably one of the next steps.
Yeah. So I think that was one of the points that I was definitely going to mention. Mike is 100% right there.
No.
And I think maybe two other things. I think that talent identification is one thing, but then developing and nurturing that talent to give them the best opportunity to become first-class elite professionals is another thing. So
Exactly. This is what we are talking about today. So we can draw some lessons from this successful footballer team, or, what's the name? Chinese football boy team. And we are trying to explain why it became successful, right? So,
well, they're just kids, I think that's the thing. So at that level, it's probably just talent. But then when you're looking at developing senior players, I think it takes more than that. So again, exposure to regular first level competition, that's incredibly important. So
exactly, a core philosophy. Yeah, a core philosophy of this project is developing players through competition, and the idea that players improve most by playing meaningful matches rather than simply training. It's actually like something new here in China. We're just catching up with this advanced training philosophy, I think that's the philosophy shared by Europe's top football nations, right? But here in China, some coaches, many of them used to be professional football players. They're still debating whether they should develop players through competition or repetitive drills. So that's a big...
both? That's the thing. Like when you're not competing in regular competitions, why not drill them? I think it is possible to do both. And I think that's what European academies get right. First of all, they've got highly experienced elite coaching. That's number one. Number two, they've got, systems in place to identify top talent. That's another element. And then, they also, because they're on the European continent and they're bordered by France, England, Germany, all of these nations. And then they also have extraordinary academies within their own countries. They are easily exposed to regular high-level competition, probably twice or three times a week. So I suppose that's where Europe has a bit of an advantage as well.
And the biggest difference is, of course, when they reach even 15 now, 16, there's an opportunity, and they're often they are thrown into the first team. So in Arsenal's first team recently, we've seen Max Dowman, only 15, Lewis Kelly, 15, 16, going back to Wayne Rooney, who was only 16 when he played first played for Everton. And that's, I think, an obstacle that still exists in China. If they're thrown in at 15, 16 to the Chinese Super League, great. But it's not the same as suddenly, and if you talk to professional footballers who've done very well, they often say coaching and the youth system was very important, but the sooner they got into or close to the first team, that's when they really started to sniff success, and really that's when they really start to feel that
they even take it back to Manchester United in the 90s, when they had 16, 17-year-olds coming through the academy, they were thrown into
the 92
and didn't have immediate success, but because they were exposed to high level, first team action on such a regular basis, by the time some of these 17-year-olds became 21, 22, they'd already had like 200 or 300 games at the first class level, and then set up success for the next decade.
And even before that, when they were quite ready, David Beckham went out on loan to Preston, I think. That's good.
Right. I want to hear some opinion from our Chinese professional, professor here. Tianbiao, your take here?
Yes. My idea is football stars like Messi, like Ronaldo, they're not the isolated thing. There must be, first of all, the football soil, and then on the soil there will be a football tree, and on this tree there will be a lot of fruits. So in China, I think we have to have football soil first. Football soil is, for example, culture. The football culture. A lot of people who would like to spend time on football, and they like to talk about football, and they like to watch football. They like to play football with their kids. This is the first thing. So the football atmosphere is important. And second, the football league system. In European countries, there are, I would say, comprehensive football match systems. When I was in Germany, I played in the 7th league. This is a quite low league, but this lower league is connected with the Bundesliga, with the first level league. Division 1, yes. The first division league. So in China, I think we better have such system from, especially for the kids. Like Mike and Brandon said, for the kids, they have games, they have football matches. How many football matches? 30 or 40 or 60 football matches 1 year? Per year. So they have a lot of football match exercises before they play in the first division league or professional leagues, right? So they have a lot of chance to play the real match. This is the second thing. So in our domestic football environments, our football kids lack, sort of practice in real match. This is the second thing. And we lack high quality matches. This is the problem. So this project, the Chinese football boys, they one of the merits is Donglu collected those talented players together and give them chance to play against those high-level teams. And like I said, this forced them to make quick decisions in the game. This kind of condition, this kind of environment helped them to grow.
Yeah, Tianbiao, I think what you mentioned there as well, a country like Germany, for example, has such an advantage. And I mean, and that's just one European nation where, for example, like you mentioned, playing in the 7th division, it's even though it's nowhere near, professional football, it's still highly organized and competitive. So if you're a 15 or 16-year-old within, let's say, Borussia Dortmund's academy, and you get sent out to play in the 4th or 5th division of Germany, you could be playing 2 or 3 matches a week, not against necessarily high-level professional athletes, but you're playing competitive, structured football 2 or 3 times a week. And by the time you return to your senior club, you may only be 16 or 17 years old, but you're already battle hardened and you've had the opportunity to, play competitive football regularly and develop yourself as a player. So that by the time you are 18, you're already almost the fully finished product.
Yes, the pyramid in these countries, in the UK, for example, the pyramid extends so far down, even to
incredible
football. And we now have really 5, probably 6 or 7 league tiers where just about every single team is now full-time professional. It's just amazing. So if you're not making it, if you're not getting into the Spurs or the Arsenal first team, you're sent on loan to a semi-professional team, and that's very, very good experience. So this is something that
they can still make a decent living playing in the 3rd or 4th division, and so so even if they're not necessarily getting regular action for their parent club, and they don't necessarily become a Premier League player, they can still fully focus on football and actually still earn a really good living playing as low as the 4th division in England or Germany or France or wherever it may be in Europe.
Well, there are players playing for my hometown who play in the 6th tier, and the average attendance is 900, and some of them are getting £1,000 a game.
That's incredible.
Which I find it's not sustainable, but the opportunities are there. So this is where these under 12s, hopefully there is a path for them to follow, and that's really what we need to see now. I think Tianbiao, you'd agree, but it's very exciting, and time's on their side.
So Tianbiao, you also agree that they should increase their frequency in taking part of real matches, right? Then what has prevented the Chinese football boy model from being adopted more widely in China then?
Maybe it's the dominance of other sports, right? So I think some of the nations that we've mentioned, France, Germany, England, football is without a doubt the number one sport in that nation, and so much history and structures have been put into place to develop this level of competition that extends far beyond the professional leagues. Like we've mentioned, Mike and Tianbiao said, it goes all the way down to the 6th or 7th division. So, in China, you've got so many other sports that have that level of development that I think to develop that level of footballing culture to compete with European nations will take extensive amounts of, investment, but also incredible amounts of time. I think a lot of that structure in Europe was developed over several decades. So to catch up to that level of accessibility to competition on a regular basis, I think it would take quite some time. And again, in China, there's so many other sports to compete with to get that level of culture instilled.
Good point. It's a very good point. We see India, for example, dominating cricket. Cricket is religion. Cricket is you travel around India, the kids are playing cricket in the streets.
And rugby in South Africa.
Example, but really it's a religion. There's that focus, and in mainland European nations as well. In England, perhaps we play too many sports, although football does dominate. And I know some of my time in China, basketball was very dominant. Great sport, and why not? But perhaps football needs to come center stage a bit more.
With the Beijing Winter Olympics, then all of a sudden, all of these winter sports were getting a lot of focus and a lot of development. So again, in a nation such as China, where there are so many people and there are so many sports that have become popular recently, I think there are quite a few sports that are battling for structure and development and investment.
Snooker. Well, we have a Chinese world champion, snooker.
Tianbiao, do you agree with them?
Doesn't it? Yeah.
Tianbiao, what's your take here?
I think we have to cautious about this model because for this project, there is Donglu who would like to spend so much money every year on this project. For this project, it costs how much? It's a lot.
60 almost 60 million yuan over 9 years period. Over $80 million US.
This is a large number of investment. So aside of Donglu, who would like to do these things as a second Donglu? This is the first thing. And second thing is, this is Chinese football boy. U12 team won this Sigismondi Cup. They're just 12 years old, and a player who can play in the professional league at this age. He seems to arrive his 18, for example, 18 years old. So there are still 6 years time to go. So the 6 years for a 12-year boy is some long time. In this long run, a boy has a lot of other things to maybe to be attracted. So maybe in this time he started to like play basketball. He started to play e-games. He started to play other games, or he has to focus on his study to pursue a college position, right? So there are a lot of things to disturb his football career. This is like,
Whereas if you look at a country like Brazil or Argentina or France or something like that, there's very little distraction outside of football. I think a lot of these kids are handed a football at 1 year old, and that's kind of the only thing that takes up their spare time. I can, tell you in Brazil, I think there are more footballs than people.
All right.
yeah.
Oh, that's new. You're saying that there's a lot of distractions out there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
All right.
And
So how
competing
to-
sports.
So how to keep them in football is a big problem, because from 12 to 18,
I think this is where the pastoral side of coaching comes in. So if you look at some of the great players that have emerged, they often refer to their original or coach that took them through, like Alex Ferguson in the Man U, was very much an avuncular figure. It wasn't just a technical, tactical genius manager. He was like a second uncle to them.
It's probably the key molding phase, right? That age between like maybe 12 and 17. That's the key. Those are the key years where someone can kind of be latched upon and molded into something that, could take them forward. It's a key developmental time, physically and mentally.
definitely.
Right.
Yes, it's key time for them to develop themselves, not only football, but also the figure, the character, and the ability to study it. Because all of things are the base for a kid to grow up, and when they grow up, they can live on themselves.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
It's a very good point. So generally, the better educated footballers, obviously, they don't have a lot of time in Europe to for example, pursue a university education. I mean, in my day, about 30 to 40 years ago, a few did, not many can now. But some of them do better at school. Players like Frank Lampard, quite a few GCS. The better educated they are, the more stable and generally the more successful. They look after themselves a bit better, I think. So I think that's a real danger. Yeah, their education is often sacrificed from a very early age.
But like you mentioned, Mike, sometimes even the ones that don't have access to education, they often have an individual like a Sir Alex Ferguson or some sort of a coaching or father figure that kind of grabs hold of them and says, listen, you have this ability or you have this talent, and that kind of gets nurtured and pressed upon. And those years are critical to forming not only their playing ability, but also their mentality, which could take them forward as a professional, but also as a human
Absolutely.
being.
So,
He was very good. He wouldn't let players like Ryan Giggs wasn't allowed to do interviews for years.
so you're saying
tell us
at the end of the day, it's the
They couldn't
financial.
choose their own boots. They couldn't choose their own agents. They couldn't do Ferguson.
No,
controlled
not at all. He wouldn't talk to them if they did. And he'd say, just get out and play. Forget about money.
Yeah,
You'll make it.
yeah.
So all in all, it's about money. You're saying.
The financial rewards
Right.
are absolutely staggering at such a young age.
phenomenal, yeah.
That is a real, I think, a concern. Yes.
So you're saying that financial support is maybe the key to the whole thing.
No, I think sometimes.
No, I'm saying that if they find themselves a regular in the first team, like Ryan Giggs, when he was 17, I think he had to demand a Mercedes because everyone had their own Mercedes. Eventually, they gave it to him.
But again, like Mike, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes even if access to funding and money is not available, sometimes a lot of these successful players that come from underdeveloped backgrounds, like you mentioned, they often identify a father figure or a coach or a teacher or someone that kind of kept them on the straight and narrow. So it's not necessarily about money. It's sometimes about just having the right guidance to get you out of whatever financial difficulties you face to give yourself the best chance of becoming a professional.
So you're saying that China needs more, figures like Donglu, that coach.
No, Chinese the kids need. If I had to narrow it down, they need correct coaching, the talent identification nailed. It seems the coaches to be developed to the same level as European coaches, and even more importantly than that, the kids need exposure to regular high-level games weekly. Those are the most important elements. If I had to single it down to one or two things.
Fair enough.
Yes, the kids need more right guidance.
And football street culture, I'd say, as well, if that's possible. You see them in the parks playing, kicking it. Don't need much space. Put your jumper down for a goalpost, kick it about. That's what the kids do here. My son does that. I did that.
Then, Tianbiao, is this Chinese football boy an isolated success story, or could it be an early sign that Chinese youth football is beginning to move in the right direction?
Oh, I think this is a difficult question because I would rather say this Chinese football boy project is somewhat isolated. We can't treat this as a thing that can copy to a group and group and group. But this is a difficult thing. I would like to repeat my idea that what we really need is to build a good environment for those kids to grow up, to nurture them, to help them become football players, or even if they do not play football when they grow older, they still can grow well and merge well into this society, and they will play as a social role like engineer, like teacher, like IT coder, like other social role other than football, but they are good persons. They will make contribution to the society. I think this is the most important thing.
I think that's for another session, not necessary for this one. We were talking about, trying to train the best of football players in the world, right?
So when we try to train the best football players in the world, first of all, I would say environment is important. Environment.
Yeah. And again, I think China already has a couple of things right. I think talent identification, I don't think that's been an issue for China. I think that their nationwide talent identification system is working.
Right.
I think where there is a little bit of lacking is the access to high-level competition, which in Europe is incredibly easy because those structures already exist. China is quite far away from Europe. So it is going to require a lot of commitment to certain teams and coaches to make sure that they have access to high-level competition and to make sure that these coaches are regularly exposed to other world-class elite coaches so that they can develop their own skill set. So I think it's those two things, a long-term commitment to a selected group of players and coaches across different age groups and making sure that they are regularly exposed to the same level of footballing competition as some of these academies and nations in Europe have, several times a week, every week over the course of decades.
Right. Now you're talking to the point tips for us.
Possibly a few more European coaches as well, working in China as well. I mean, I was lucky enough
never a bad idea.
A lot of them.
Harry Hahn was in he managed the national team. He managed Tianjin, Chongqing. Someone like that has got to have a huge impact because he has so much to offer about where he come from, how they do it, how he did it. Obviously, China will find their own way, most definitely.
Yeah.
And modify and is in a good position to learn, but perhaps some support from some top flight European coaches would be a good thing as well, and maybe a national coaching center if that exists.
We've already had quite a few foreign or European coaches here in China, but the results are not so up to expectation. Maybe I can say that.
Well, I think the players coming through are stronger now, and these under 12s that we haven't seen this sort of level. Okay, they're only 12. Who knows what the future holds? But this is very, very exciting to go there and win every game and only concede 2 goals. It's unprecedented.
But along with that excitement, there needs to come a certain amount of patience as well. Developing that football culture and football, like you mentioned, Tianbiao, that soil, that grounding. It really does take quite a lot of time. And I think that even all of these elements that we mentioned, I think they will all be very helpful. But I think over a certain amount of time, once all of that exposure happens and all of that development happens from a player style and coaching element, eventually China will start to develop their own footballing identity and their own footballing culture. And that will take time. But once that is in place, and it will take time to get there, but once it is in place, then once China has its own sort of footballing culture and ethos and identity and potentially style of play that is, filtered across all age groups, then I think that's when true development happens. And then that's when you'll see sustained success, not just from under 12 teams, but from the senior teams, which I think is what China is truly desperate for, to see regular success from their senior teams, the men's and women's side. And that unfortunately, and patience is a difficult thing in sport, but it will take some time to get to that level.
Then what indicators should we watch over the next 5 to 10 years to determine whether this achievement represents a genuine turning point for Chinese football? And Brandon?
I would say continued success that filters across multiple age groups and for continued levels of achievement at international competitions and for local coaches, becoming more and more world renowned. I think those are going to be important elements that will ultimately lead to the development of senior football in China. So if we look at this particular success as an individual story, if we want to see that, continue, I mean, obviously you want to see continued success at this particular age group, but it needs to be modeled, and what created that success needs to be copied and implemented across other age groups so that it, eventually over several years gets to the senior team. And it's not going to be overnight. It is going to take several years of development and all of the other elements that we mentioned. So I think that this, again, rightfully needs to be celebrated, but in terms of the impact that it will have in terms of Chinese football development, that cannot be analyzed, I would say, for the foreseeable future, for maybe the next, 10 years or so, to be cautious.
Yeah, actually, we were in the FIFA World Cup once, right? That's back in 2002. And actually, you're saying...
Well, that was fortunate, wasn't it? Because South Korea and Japan qualified automatically. I think that made it easier.
It's true.
Not
just the years, it's already been decades we were chasing this. But when do you realistically see China returning to the World Cup? And
I think self-belief comes into it. I was always, my wife's Chinese, and her parents and my friends, there was always this phrase: when it comes to a small ball, we're very, very good. When it comes to a big ball, we're not as good. I remember them saying that. And I think, well, you can be. There's nothing, as Brandon and Tianbiao have said, infrastructure, regular success. There's no reason why not. And such a large playing population has to be very, very exciting. They get it right. Then the best of those the best across that playing population. Who knows? The long way to go.
There's no reason that it can't filter down into football, because when you look at sports
Absolutely.
on the international stage where China are successful and they have that confidence, it's scary. Like when I look at the Olympics and I see some of the divers lining up, or some of the swimmers now that are coming through, other nations look at China in fear, because those athletes step up to the podium and they know they're going to win. So there's no reason that mentality can't eventually filter down to the football teams.
Yeah, watch our younger generations just inner belief, expressing their Chineseness, the Chinese identity. That could sweep things, very, very much farther forward. But as Tianbiao points out, it's an isolated case. But it's got to start somewhere.
Tianbiao from
players at the top level.
I think we need time and patience for the young players. We need to give them room to wait until they grow up. And to help our Chinese coaches to level up.
It will take time. It will definitely take time.
Yes, it takes time. Yes.
Yeah, it can't.
It's a virtuous circle. If the younger players coming forward are so much better, I think that will that will have a feed on very positive effect to the Chinese club system, and perhaps that wasn't there before. So we did, like you said, had a lot of international footballers. Drogba went to China, a lot of coaches, but perhaps the level and the standards weren't there. But if that comes through at a much higher level, that can change. I think got to be patient, but it could change fairly quickly. I think 2034, Saudi Arabia, I think, are hosting. That's the sort of that's China's
a good benchmark to look towards.
Why not qualify for that?
A fair amount of years away.
These kids will be 20 odd. That could be their goal. That's take China to that World Cup.
The talent identification is clearly there. I think it's the nurturing and the culture that needs to be worked on to instill that ethos that takes them from the age of 12 all the way to 23 or 24. Getting that right is difficult, but it is doable if there is the right level of commitment applied.
Absolutely. And the self-belief with diet as well. So it was always the case that the sort of Asian physique was very naturally slim and lithe and very good for table tennis, but there's no reason why the strength isn't there. We've had Chinese players playing in the top league here before. I think of Zheng Zhi, Sun Jihai, who were very, very talented and played regularly for Manchester City.
And the coaches are definitely there, because some of the best weightlifters in the world are Chinese, right? So I think definitely the right coaching and nutrition is there for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, let's just hope for the best. And we'll stop there. Many thanks to Brandon Yates, our very own sports host, Mike Bastin from the University of Southampton, and Dr. Liu Tianbiao from Beijing Normal University for your time and insights. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop us a line at radio@cgtn.com. iTunes, thank you for listening. Join us again next week for more chat at the Chat Lounge. Talk soon.
Sideline Story brings you all things sports related. The hottest topics, latest events, juiciest stories, all with a very personal take. Subscribe to Sideline Story Podcast for heated sports discussions covering events that are happening in China and around the world.
Hey there, global listeners. Get ready for the hottest discussions on the airwaves. Roundtable, your passport to the heart of China's buzzing society. Pressing issues, lifestyle trends, and impactful policies, we're tackling them head on with wit, wisdom, and a whole lot of fun. Discover the real China through the eyes and voices of its people. Gain a unique global perspective on topics that resonate universally. Tune in and turn up the excitement dial on Roundtable as we bridge gaps and break barriers one discussion at a time. Don't just listen, be transformed.